You got good news today. Something shifted in your favor. Maybe it was a promotion. Maybe it was a small win. Maybe it was just a decision you finally made after weeks of overthinking. And before you could even feel proud, before you could sit with it for even a minute, your hand reached for your phone. You started typing, not to celebrate, not to share joy, but to explain. You started building a case, the justification, a defense for something that didn't even need defending. You explained why you deserved it, why it made sense, why it wasn't luck, why people shouldn't misunderstand it. And if you're honest, you've done this more times than you can count. You cancel plans and then write a paragraph explaining why. You say no and then soften it with 5 reasons so nobody feels uncomfortable. You make a decision about your life and feel this pressure, almost like an itch under your skin, to make sure everyone understands. But here's the truth most people never say out loud. That need to explain yourself is quietly draining your power. It's stealing your confidence in ways you don't even notice, and if you don't see it clearly, it will shape your entire life. Because every time you over-explain, what you're really saying underneath all those words is this: I don't fully trust myself yet. And once you see that, everything starts to change. Because think about it for a second. When did you decide that your life needed approval? When did it become normal to believe that every decision you make has to be understood, validated, and agreed upon by other people? There was no moment, no agreement, no contract you signed, but somehow you've been living like there was. Like there's this invisible rule that says if I do something, I must explain it. If someone questions me, I must justify it. If someone disagrees, I must convince them. And that rule feels so real that you don't even question it anymore. But here's the part that changes everything. That rule isn't real. You created it, not consciously, not intentionally, but somewhere along the way you learned that explaining yourself made things easier, safer, more acceptable. Maybe growing up your choices were constantly questioned. Maybe you were in environments where nothing you did felt enough unless you could explain it perfectly. Maybe you learned that if you didn't justify your feelings, they would be dismissed. So you adapted. You got better at explaining, better at proving, better at making sure nobody could misunderstand you. And for a while, it worked. But what helped you survive is now holding you back. Because every time you over-explain, you move your center of control away from yourself and hand it to someone else. You stop asking, do I believe in this? And start asking, will they accept this? And that shift is subtle, but it's everything. Because the moment your decisions depend on how they're received, they stop being fully yours. And you start living carefully instead of truthfully. Now here's something even deeper. Over-explaining isn't just a habit. It's a signal. It's your mind trying to protect you, because somewhere inside there's still a belief that says, if they don't understand me, I might lose something. Respect, approval, connection, safety. So you try to control the outcome by controlling the narrative. You add more detail, more reasons, more explanation, hoping that if you say it perfectly, nobody will judge you. But reality doesn't work like that. People will misunderstand you anyway. People will judge you anyway. People will create their own version of your story, no matter how clearly you explain it. And the more you try to control that, the more exhausting your life becomes. You've probably felt this before. You send a message, then send another, and another, just to make sure it was clear. You say something simple and then immediately feel the need to explain what you meant. You achieve something, and instead of owning it, you downplay it so people don't feel uncomfortable, and without realizing it, you start shrinking yourself, not in big, obvious ways, but in small, constant adjustments. You speak a little less directly. You soften your opinions. You delay your decisions. You edit yourself before you even open your mouth. And all of it comes from the same place: fear of being misunderstood. But here's the truth that most people never realize. The more you explain, the less powerful you sound. It feels like the opposite should be true. It feels like more explanation should create more clarity, more trust, more understanding, but it doesn't. Because when you overload people with reasons, their brain doesn't think this makes perfect sense. It thinks, why are they trying so hard to convince me? And that subtle shift changes everything. Confidence doesn't come from saying more. It comes from needing to say less. Think about the most grounded person you know. When they speak, they don't rush. They don't pile on explanations. They say what they mean and stop. And there's a weight to their words, a calm certainty that doesn't ask for permission. That's what real confidence looks like. Not loud, not aggressive, just clear and complete. And the moment you start practicing that, your entire presence changes, because now you're not speaking to be accepted, you're speaking from alignment, and people feel that. Even if they don't agree with you, they feel it. Now let's go deeper into something most people avoid. The people you feel the need to explain yourself to the most are often the people you feel least safe with. And that's uncomfortable to admit, because these aren't strangers. These are usually people close to you. Family, friends, partners, colleagues. But if you constantly feel like you have to justify your choices around someone, that's not normal. That's not connection. That's pressure. In healthy relationships, there's space. You can say, this is what I've decided. And the other person doesn't immediately question your judgment. They trust that you've thought it through. They trust that you know your own life. But when that trust isn't there, something else fills the gap. Doubt. And when you feel that doubt, you try to compensate. You explain more. You prove more. You justify more, hoping that if you say enough, they'll finally understand. But the truth is, no amount of explanation can fix a lack of trust. And once you see that, you stop trying to earn understanding from people who aren't offering it. You stop performing your decisions and start standing in them. And that's where your power begins to return. Now here's something most people struggle with: silence. The moment there's a pause in a conversation, most people panic. They rush to fill it. They start talking just to avoid the discomfort. And that's where over-explaining explodes, because silence feels like pressure. But silence isn't pressure. Silence is space. And space is where your words gain weight. When you answer immediately without thinking, you speak from reaction. When you pause, even for a few seconds, you speak from intention. And that small shift changes everything, because now your words are chosen, not automatic. You say less, but it means more, and people feel that difference instantly. It's not about being quiet, it's about being deliberate, about letting your words land instead of flooding the conversation. And once you get comfortable with that, over-explaining starts to disappear naturally, because you're no longer trying to fill every gap. You're allowing space to do its work. Now imagine this. Someone questions your decision. Old pattern? You defend, you explain, you justify, you try to prove that you're right. But what if you didn't? What if instead of reacting, you just listened? What if you said, I hear you, and stopped there? No defense, no explanation, no urgency, just presence. That changes the entire dynamic, because now you're not playing the game of who's right. You're not trying to win. You're grounded. And when you're grounded, you don't need to prove anything. You can take in what's useful and let go of what's not, without turning every conversation into a battle. That's real strength. Not winning arguments, but not needing to fight them in the first place. Now here's where everything starts to come together. You don't need to become distant. You don't need to stop communicating. You don't need to shut people out. The goal isn't silence. The goal is clarity. There's a difference between explaining from fear and communicating from truth. When something genuinely affects another person, clear communication matters. When you've made a mistake, owning it matters. When you want to build deeper connection, sharing openly matters. But that's not over-explaining. That's intentional communication. The difference is simple. One comes from confidence. The other comes from fear. And once you can tell the difference, your entire way of speaking changes. You stop talking to protect yourself and start speaking to express yourself. And that's when something powerful happens. You begin to come back to yourself, the version of you that exists without performance, without editing, without needing to be understood all the time. Because here's the truth, your identity is not something that needs to be explained into existence. It already exists, before the words, before the justifications, before the explanations, and every time you stop over-explaining, you reconnect with that, little by little, decision by decision, moment by moment. You choose what you want without defending it. You say no, without a story attached. You leave when you're ready, without creating an excuse. And at first, it feels uncomfortable, because you're breaking a pattern that's been there for years. But then something shifts. You start to feel lighter, clearer, more certain. And for the first time in a long time, you feel like your life is actually yours. Not something you have to present, not something you have to justify, just something you live. And that's where everything changes. And once you start feeling that shift, once you taste even a small moment of what it's like to move without explaining, you realize something you didn't expect. How much energy you've been wasting, not in big, dramatic ways, but in constant, quiet leaks. Every time you replay a conversation in your head, thinking of better ways to explain yourself, every time you hesitate before making a decision, because you're already imagining how you'll justify it later, every time you shrink a truth, just to make it easier for someone else to accept. That's energy, mental energy, emotional energy, creative energy. And most people never realize how much of it is tied up in managing other people's perceptions, until they stop. Because the moment you stop over-explaining, that energy doesn't disappear, it comes back to you, and when it comes back, it has to go somewhere. And this is where your life begins to expand. You start thinking more clearly, because your thoughts aren't being filtered through "how will this sound?" You start acting faster, because you're not waiting for invisible approval. You start creating more, because you're no longer editing yourself before you even begin. Most people think creativity is about talent. It's not. It's about freedom, and over-explaining kills that freedom, because it trains you to second-guess every idea before it has a chance to exist. But when you remove that pressure, when you stop trying to justify everything, your mind opens up. Ideas flow easier. Decisions feel lighter. You stop overthinking and start doing, and that alone can change the entire direction of your life. Now think about your relationships, not the surface-level ones, the real ones, the ones that matter. What happens when you stop performing in them? When you stop trying to say the right thing and just say what's true? At first, it might feel risky, because you're used to smoothing things out, softening edges, making sure nobody gets uncomfortable. But real connection doesn't come from comfort, it comes from honesty. And honesty doesn't need a long explanation, it needs clarity. When you say what you actually feel without wrapping it in 10 layers of justification, something different happens. People feel you, not your explanation, not your strategy. You, and the right people, the ones who are actually meant to be in your life. They don't need a perfect explanation. They just need the real version of you. And when they get that, the connection deepens. It becomes stronger, simpler, more honest. And the relationships that can't handle that, the ones that only work when you're explaining, adjusting, shrinking, those start to feel different. You begin to see them clearly, not with anger, not with resentment, just with awareness. And awareness changes how you show up, because now you're not trying to force understanding. You're not trying to convince. You're simply choosing where to invest your energy, and that choice alone changes everything. Now let's talk about decisions, because this is where the biggest transformation happens. Most people don't struggle to make decisions because they lack intelligence. They struggle because they're carrying too many imagined voices. What will they think? Will this make sense to them? How do I explain this? So even a simple choice becomes heavy, complicated, delayed. But when you remove that layer, when you stop factoring in everyone else's potential reaction, decision-making becomes clear. Not always easy, but clear, because now there's only one question that matters. Is this right for me? Not will everyone agree, not can I explain this perfectly, just is this aligned with who I am and where I'm going? And when you start making decisions from that place, something powerful happens. You trust yourself more because you're actually listening to yourself, and that trust builds over time with every small choice you make without explaining. With every moment you stand in your decision without defending it, you rebuild something that may have been missing for a long time. Self-respect, not the loud kind, not the kind that needs validation, but the quiet kind, the kind that comes from knowing, I can rely on myself. And once you have that, you don't chase approval the same way. You don't need everyone to understand you, because you understand yourself. And that's enough. Now here's the part most people don't talk about. When you stop over-explaining, some people will feel uncomfortable. They might ask more questions. They might push harder. They might even accuse you of changing. And they're right. You are changing. You're no longer playing the role they're used to. You're no longer over-explaining to make them comfortable. You're no longer shaping your decisions around their expectations, and that disrupts the pattern. But that discomfort, it's temporary, because eventually people adjust. They learn that you mean what you say. They learn that you don't need to justify everything. They learn that your words are enough, and if they don't adjust, that tells you something important too, because not everyone is meant to grow with you, and that's okay. Your job isn't to be understood by everyone. Your job is to be aligned with yourself, and the more you live that way, the more your life starts to feel different, lighter, cleaner, more direct. You wake up without that constant background pressure to explain your existence. You move through your day without rehearsing conversations in your head. You speak and feel complete after you speak. No need to add more. No need to go back and fix it. Just done. And that simplicity creates peace, not because life becomes perfect, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer splitting your attention between what you feel and how it will be received. You're whole. And that wholeness shows up in everything. In how you walk, in how you speak, in how you decide, in how you show up in rooms. People may not even know what changed, but they'll feel it. They'll feel that you're not trying to prove anything. They'll feel that you're not seeking approval. They'll feel that you're grounded, and that kind of presence is rare, because most people are still explaining, still adjusting, still asking for permission in ways they don't even realize. But you're not there anymore. Or at least you're not staying there, because now you see it. Now you notice the urge, that moment where you want to add just one more reason, that moment where you feel like you should explain a little more just in case, and instead of following it automatically, you pause, you breathe, and you choose differently. You say what needs to be said, and then you stop. And in that moment, you take your power back, not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady way that builds over time. And the more you practice that, the more natural it becomes. Until one day, you don't even think about it anymore. You just live. You decide. You speak, without the weight, without the pressure, without the constant need to explain. And that's when you realize this was never about communication. It was about freedom. The freedom to exist without justification. The freedom to choose without permission. The freedom to be without explanation. And once you experience that, you don't go back. And as that freedom becomes your new normal, something even deeper begins to unfold inside you. It's subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but it's powerful. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop having those long internal debates where one part of you knows what you want, and the other part is already preparing the explanation for everyone else. That conflict starts to disappear, because now your decisions don't have to pass through a committee of imagined opinions. They move straight from clarity into action, and that changes the speed of your life. Things that used to take days of overthinking now take minutes. Conversations that used to drain you now feel simple. You say what you mean. You mean what you say. And then you move on. No mental replay. No second guessing. No, I should have said it differently. That alone creates a kind of peace most people are still chasing. But there's something even more important than peace. It's dignity. Not the kind that comes from status. Not the kind that comes from achievements. But the kind that comes from being fully aligned with yourself. Because every time you over-explain, you chip away at that alignment. You adjust your truth. You dilute your message. You soften your decisions. And over time, you stop feeling solid. You start feeling scattered. But when you stop doing that, when your words and your decisions come from the same place, you feel grounded, whole, like there's nothing missing and nothing you need to prove. That's dignity. And once you feel it, you protect it. You don't give it away just to avoid discomfort. You don't trade it for temporary approval. You hold it quietly, consistently. Now imagine living your life from that place. You walk into a room, not wondering how you're being perceived, but fully present in who you are. You make choices, not based on how they'll be received, but based on what feels right. You speak, not to convince, but to express. And the best part, you don't feel the need to explain any of it, because you know. And when you know, you don't chase agreement. You don't chase validation. You don't chase understanding. You allow people to have their opinions, and you keep moving. That's a completely different way of living, and most people never reach it. Not because it's impossible, but because they never let go of the habit that's holding them back. The habit of explaining everything. Now, here's something I want you to really sit with. There will always be moments where explaining feels easier, where giving a long reason feels safer than standing in a short truth, where adding more words feels like protection. And in those moments, you'll be tempted to go back, to fall into the old pattern, to say, let me just explain this one time. But every time you choose not to, every time you stay with clarity instead of comfort, you strengthen something inside you. You reinforce the belief that your words are enough, that your decisions are valid, that your life doesn't need to be justified, and that belief becomes your foundation, not something you think about, something you live from. And once that foundation is strong, everything built on top of it becomes stronger too. Your confidence, your relationships, your work, your sense of direction, all of it, because it's no longer built on approval. It's built on alignment. Now take a moment and think about the version of you that lives this way fully. The version of you who doesn't over-explain, who doesn't hesitate to say what's true, who doesn't feel the need to defend every decision. How do they move? How do they speak? How do they handle pressure? That version of you isn't far away. It's not a future identity you have to become. It's already there. Underneath the habits, underneath the conditioning, underneath the fear, and every time you choose clarity over explanation, you get closer to it. Not all at once, but steadily. And that's how real change happens, not in one big moment, but in small repeated choices. So here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Think of one decision you've been over-explaining, one situation where you've been trying to make everyone understand, and just stop. Stop adding more reasons. Stop trying to perfect the explanation. Stop adjusting your truth. Say what needs to be said. Clearly, simply, and then let it stand. Feel the discomfort if it comes. That's part of the process. But also notice something else. Notice the strength underneath it, the quiet certainty, the space you just created. That's your power. And the more you choose it, the more it grows. Until one day, it's just who you are. Someone who doesn't need to explain their existence. Someone who doesn't need permission to live their life. Someone who moves with clarity, speaks with intention, and stands without apology. And when you reach that point, you won't just feel different. Your entire life will be different. because you're no longer living for understanding, you're living from truth, and that changes everything. So from this moment forward, remember this. You don't need more words. You need more trust in your own voice. You don't need better explanations. You need stronger alignment with your decisions. You don't need everyone to understand you. You need to understand yourself. And once you have that, you have everything you need.